Today marks the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I, known as the Great War for a time and the war to end all wars, which sadly was not the case. The war lasted from 1914 to 1918. By the end of it, there was an estimated 40+ million casualties, over 20 million of them dead, both military and civilian. The majority of the fighting may have occurred in Europe on the western, eastern and Alpine fronts, but was also fought on the seas and in the air. It was also fought all over the world, raging all across Africa, where a German army ran rings around the Allied forces, to far off in Asia. Fighting raged throughout the Middle East as well. It was the first fully industrial war, making war an industry, churning out millions and millions of munitions, to which millions of lives would be lost due to their use. Great inventions would leap forward in evolution. Some would be weapons of war, but would have civilian uses in decades to come, from the importance of the submarines, sound equipment, from the aeroplane turning from a hobby, then to an observation device, to fighters and bombers. The tank would see its debut, and machine guns and artillery would cut men down who walked into the 20th century using 100-year-old tactics from the 19th century and the Napoleonic era, cutting huge swathes of men down from across the world and attempting to wipe out a generation of men. If the cold of winter and artillery and bullets were not bad enough, waterlogged trenches, rats, the mud, barbed wire, brutal trench warfare, homesickness made things even more so. And then there was the horrible use of poison gas. Huge battles killed hundreds of thousands, and many parts of the line did not move for 4 years once the trenches began in 1914 on the Western Front, right up until the end of the war. Some of the worst battles in history were fought in this war, such was their ferocity. Whole units would rise to make a charge, and whole units would disappear amongst a hail of bombs and bullets. Men disappeared, blown apart by artillery or sunk in the mud, never to be found again. Bodies are still being recovered by farmers 100 years on, and chances are they'll be found for the next 100 years or more, all over Europe still today. Over 16 million animals served in the First World War, as mechanical transport was limited. Buses were used as troop carriers and ambulances, for example. Animals therefore were of great importance, as they were used for transport, communication and companionship. An estimated 1.2 million horses, donkeys, mules and camels carried food, water, ammunition and medical supplies to men at the front, and approximately 200,000 pigeons carried messages. Other animals were used as well, like dogs, to help search for wounded troops on the battlefield. Most of the 250,000 horses used by the British and Commonwealth troops did not survive the war, for example. There's a war memorial dedicated to animals in war near Marble Arch in London. It is said that every street in Britain had at least one man that had been lost in battle, and then there were the injuries, physical, mental and emotional. In France, the cornflower is used in remembrance. In Germany, it's the forget-me-not. And in Britain, it's the poppy. After the war, outpourings of grief saw monuments of war graves made to honour the dead and try to make sense of why man had seemed to go mad for 4 years. It would seem even nature would get involved, as in the last year of the war, the Spanish flu influenza pandemic affected 500 million people worldwide, and is estimated to have killed between 50 to 100 million people. So many disappeared in the war and have no known grave. When in Britain the cenotaph in London was finally completed in 1920, it gave everyone who lost someone with no known grave, and those who had lost someone with a grave, a chance to grieve at this place, as it could be for their loved one. This day would be marked around the world for all the lost souls, as they should be remembered, with some first-time acts of reconciliation that did not occur at the end of the First World War. It sowed the seeds to allow fascists and Nazis to bring the world to a Second World War less than 21 years later. The war seemed to take a life of its own. The armistice was signed at 5 a.m. in the morning and would end about 6 hours later at 11 a.m. on the 11th of November 1918, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. However, in just those last 6 hours, over 12,000 more men would die, thousands more than the Allied losses on the whole of the first day of the D-Day landings in Normandy on the 6th of June 1944 in World War II. The last of the men and women who fought in that terrible war may have gone now, but time and history will remember them, lest we forget.